Hi everyone, welcome to today's video. So today I'm going to be talking about the banking sector in India. Will the growth of Indian banks parallel India's growth story? This is the question I wanted to answer for myself. So I will share the insights I've learned in trying to answer this question. My thesis is that the growth of the economy is not possible without the role of the banking industry playing a key part in India. So in April 2023, the IMF or the International Monetary Fund said that the Indian economy continues to perform well and remains the fastest growing Asian economy and one of the fastest in the world. They have forecasted GDP to be at 5.9% for India, which is higher than other major economies like US, UK, and Brazil. So there's no question that India's GDP is on the rise and will continue to grow over the next decade. So what does this rising economic growth in India mean for the banking industry? So if I'm betting on India to keep growing, then investing in the banking industry is a no-brainer. This sector offers that idea that heads I win, tails I don't lose that much. So in my mind, efficiently run banks in India will only get bigger and bigger. This is my thesis, so I wanted to gather trends and data to support my thinking. I found 4 reasons to support my thesis that well-run banks in India fundamentally are poised for a massive bull run in the next decade. So the first obvious reasons for banks to grow is that the number of bank accounts in India have grown by 3x in the last 10 years. And there's an interesting story I want to share that triggered all of the rise in the number of bank accounts. So if you remember back in 2014, the government of India launched this initiative called Jan Dhan Yojana, and its primary aim was financial inclusion. What they did was, starting in October 2014, they rolled out this program and they linked it with Aadhaar. And basically what they had was they had scanners in front of a lot of banks in India, particularly public-run banks. And all people had to do was put their fingerprint into the scanner, scan their fingerprints, and it auto-filled all of their key information like address, first name, last name, and their Aadhaar number. So through this initiative, what happened is that people who previously didn't have bank accounts now have bank accounts. So think of the impact of the financial inclusion of this initiative, right? So 47.8 crore accounts translates to about 500 million new bank accounts. I mean, that's mind-boggling, right? That's higher than a lot of countries put together, the number of bank accounts in smaller countries like Norway and a lot of countries around the world, actually. So what happens is that access to a bank account is significant in terms of financial inclusion. Those who could not take small loans now have access to capital. Now they have a history with a bank and they start to build credit, and therefore it fuels economic growth, right? So the second reason for my thesis in terms of why well-run banks are positioned for a massive bull run is related to the first one, and it's about digital infrastructure and technology that is supporting financial inclusion in India. So I'll use the example of UPI. I live in Canada, and typically if I want to buy products, even if it's small transactions, I use my debit or credit card. I go in and I either tap or use my phone, which has the credit card saved in it, and tap my phone in the reader. But when I go to India, I installed UPI on my last trip, and I was mind blown how seamless the transactions are using UPI. If I had a choice between UPI and using my debit or credit card, 100% of the time I would use UPI. So whether it's a small vendor in India or larger stores, branded stores in India, they all have UPI scanners that make it seamless for people to pay for products and services. And what this does is it again fuels economic growth. It has this multiplier effect. Now with UPI, all of the small businesses that were previously using cash have this money funneled into their bank accounts. And so banks are smart enough to figure out that all of this money, that extra money that was previously cash now in their system, means that banks like HDFC Bank, Axis Bank, it gives them working capital, and they lend out that money at much lower rates to these small businesses than previously. These small businesses would go informal lending players, right? People who charge enormous high amounts of interest rates, 30%, 40%, and lend them money via cash. Well, banks now, what they do is they use all of this money that comes through the UPI transactions day to day, and they lend them to small businesses at 10 to 12%. And all of a sudden, this working capital, again, fuels that economic growth because people can borrow money at much lower rates to fuel their business, to grow their business. So that's reason number 2. Let's move to reason number 3 as to why banks will grow significantly in India. So the third reason is related to reforms. Reforms by the Reserve Bank of India, or the RBI, are strengthening the banking system in India. There is a code called the Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code, and that is very technical in nature. I won't get into the nitty-gritties, but in short, what it means is that there is much stronger corporate governance for banks that increases creditor confidence in banks. What it does is it also provides banks to much more easily deal with insolvency cases. In other words, people who borrow and don't pay back money to the banks are able to limit their losses because of these reforms. So the reforms are playing a key role in strengthening the entire banking system, which only means that these banks, for them to get wiped out completely, is much harder because there are checks and balances in place that prevent that from happening. And finally, what we're seeing, the fourth reason why I believe banking industry is poised for a bull run, is that we're seeing a huge demand in loan books across banks, not just one particular bank, particularly the larger ones like Axis Bank, ICICI, HDFC. Huge demand in the loan book. And I read a report from Ernst & Young that predicted that in the next 5 years, the mortgage demand, so raising money to buy their first home typically, is going to double. So as income levels are rising, people are able to now transition from just renting to owning their first home. And that is accelerating the demand for loans. Well, if there's more demand for loans and people are able to pay their mortgage or their monthly EMIs, it means that banks will make more money. So I've given you 4 reasons as to why I believe banks are poised for a massive bull run in India. If you found this video useful, please hit the like button and subscribe to my channel. As always, I am not a professional financial advisor. I am merely sharing what I'm learning and discovering. Use this as one data point. And to me, risk in the stock market is not knowing what you're doing. So just treat this as one data point and keep learning, keep enjoying the journey, and I will see you next time.